your questions in the comments on Facebook, and we will get to them later. And that brings me to my two background wizards, so to speak. We have Kim Rogers and Haylin Chock. They are gonna be in the background. Yes, you see them waving. And I'm Julia Diekmann, and I will be the host for tonight. All right, I give everybody a few minutes to put in where they are joining us from, and we will see, as everybody answers, we will see it populating. It's kind of cool. The Oregon.
Oh, fantastic.
California, how awesome. Okay, for everybody who joined us now, so if you have any questions that you want to ask, you can either put them in the chat if you're on Zoom, or if you're on Facebook, put them in the comments. In the chat, we will also have PDFs and links later on that you can see there. So yeah, I think with that, we are ready to introduce today's topic. So today, we are going to talk about how do we protect our forests for our children's future. And that's a great question, I think, but also not very easy to answer. But we have some very awesome panelists who will help us do that. We have Dr. Andre Raine, who is the science director for Archipelago Research and Conservation. And he will talk a little bit about birds and eggs. We have Dustin Wolkis, he's the seed bank manager and laboratory manager at the National Tropical Botanical Garden, and he will talk a little bit about seeds. And then we have Haylin Chock. She is the outreach specialist at the Kaua'i Invasive Species Committee, and she will talk about the Hawaiian word hua and how it relates to eggs and seeds. So she will kind of bring everything together. So here's what we will do. They will give a short presentation, and then afterwards we have time for some questions. So as a reminder, please put your questions in the chat if you're on Zoom, or in the comments if you're on Facebook. Okay, so let's start with you, Haylin.
All right.
Haylin. Hi, Haylin.
Hi.
Thanks
Aloha.
for being here.
Aloha kako, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our second Forest Fridays. Let me just share my screen real quick.
I just wanted to say a few things about you first, if I may. Haylin was born and raised on Kauai. She grew up dancing hula and working in the Aina, which drove her to pursue a Bachelor's of Science from UH West Oahu. She has recently joined the KISC team as the outreach coordinator. Haylin has worked at fellow nonprofits such as Waipa, Malama Hulea, and spent her off time volunteering in Loi and practicing jujutsu. That's awesome. And I know that you recently got a new belt.
I got a blue belt. Yay.
That's awesome. All right, welcome, Haylin, and you're up.
Okay, awesome. Let me just share my screen really quick, and we will get started. Okay, so welcome everybody to Forest Fridays. Thank you, Julia, for that lovely introduction, and thank you everyone for joining us. Today, we're going to be talking about the theme of hua. So literal translation of the word hua is going to be fruit, egg, produce, ovum, anything that is in the process of maturing. It's not quite mature yet, but that's kind of what I want you to think about when we're talking about the concept of hua. So in this slide, you can see that there is a hua manu, which is an egg. And this is a shearwater that Andre works with. Thank you, Andre, for this photo. So that can be translated to egg, hua'ai, or seed. So like here we have some lychee. Hopefully we get some lychee this year because I didn't get any last year. And then we also have hua kanu featuring Dustin. So kanu means plant. So you're thinking hua as the precursor to what it's talking about. So there's hua manu. So manu means bird. Hua'ai, a premature fruit or seed. And then hua kanu is a premature plant. So that's what we're thinking about when we're thinking of hua. Hua also is translated to be a moon phase in the Hawaiian moon phase calendar. So here we have at the this part, if you can see my cursor, the moon phase down here is called Hua, and it's a waxing gibbous. I think that's what it's called. Yeah. And this is right before Akua and Mahealani, where it's like just about full, but not quite. You can still see there's a little bit more on the bottom that needs to be filled. So when you think of Hua, it doesn't have to necessarily mean egg or plant or seed or ovum. It's all things that are about to mature. I got this photo from Homai Kapono, which is a great Instagram account. He is an awesome resource for anybody that's interested in Hawaiian moon phases. So if you want to check that out, I put his Instagram handle right under there, and I will also put it in the chat. And we're also talking about spring. So when we talk about eggs and fruiting seasons and our seeds, we're talking about the new promise of life. And we are currently in spring. We just recently had the spring equinox, and that is actually called Kealo Piko Owa Kea. There's two of those, and there's going to be one in the spring and one in the fall, and those represent the spring and fall equinoxes. And they fall between the summer and the winter equinoxes, which are called Keala Polohiva a Kanaloa on the left and Keala Polohiva a Kane on the right. Those are the names of the equinoxes in Hawaiian and how we do ethno-astronomy for Hawaiians tracking the celestial bodies. I learned about this through many works of Kalei Nu'uhiwa, who is an amazing resource. She is an ethno-astronomer, and she has a lot of great talks that you can look up, books, resources, if you're interested in learning more about the Hawaiian celestial bodies and how we track things. So since it was just spring, we are moving into the season of Kauwela. Vela means hot. Kau is like a time. So we're moving into summertime, but we're not quite there yet. We're not quite ready to harvest. So this is a time of preparation, changes in planting. I know that the Kaua'i Ula are here right now, and they're in their mating season. So these are all precursors to the harvest of fall and summer that are to come. This is also a time for planting, changes in ceremony. We're moving out of the season of Lono, which is more of the rainy season, the Makahiki season, where it's peaceful. And we're moving into the political season, or coup season. So in Hawaiian understanding of seasons, when we're moving from Keala Polohiva a Kanaloa, which is winter and the time of Lono, we're moving into Keala Polohiva a Kane. This is a time where ceremonies would be changed for specifically ali'i nui. They would be consulting about war, they would be consulting about political moves, any kind of changes in law. So it's a very interesting time that we're in right now, and we also have like our legislatures open, so how about that? And it happens to be the political season as well. Also, going back to springtime and the birds are coming together, like the Kaua'i Ula, I actually just got to see them today. We're gonna lead that into Andre, and we're gonna be talking about his work that he has with the Archipelago Research and Conservation.
All right, Haylin, thank you very much. That was super interesting. I learned a lot. And I think it's also great that you get to talk about this like for your work, which kind of brings me to my first question. Like how do you get where you are? Like how do you, like, why did you choose this career path?
Yeah, so I have danced hula since I was 3 years old. And it was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, but all of it came through my identity and culture and knowing where I am and where I come from. And then when I decided to go to college, I realized that, you know, going into a business degree or something that would just make money and push me towards a good career, quote unquote, wasn't something that would make me happy, and I would be really miserable. I'm very fortunate to have that luxury to really evaluate my life that way. And then when I went to West Oahu, I found a really awesome program called the Sustainable Community Food Systems Program. And it was all about community wellness. Let's see, it was a very new program and it focused on the environment. It was basically a degree in aloha aina. And I knew that that's where I wanted my life to go. And that's where I wanted to spend my life on this earth, was doing things that take care of the place where I live.
That's
and
great.
then I just got, you know, the stars aligned and I happened to end up here at KISC, and I am very fortunate to be doing this work now.
Well, and we are very fortunate to have you here. That's really awesome. Thank you for doing this and doing what you do. Let's see, let me check with Kim if there's any questions that popped up anywhere for Haylin.
I just scanned a bunch of Facebook pages and I don't see any that have popped up right now, but I did drop a link in to the chat box for the KISC KISC website, so that people who want to know a little bit more about the kind of work Haylin does, you can visit that website.
Okay, perfect, yes. So people can check it out. And so if anybody has a question for Haylin, feel free to write it in the chat or in the comments at any time. At the end, we will have a little bit more time for questions.
And we've got one that just popped in.
Yeah.
Okay.
So can whoever refer to a human baby?
No, not a baby, but it does refer to an ovum. So in the literal translation in vehevehe.org, which is the online Olelo resource that I highly recommend if you don't have a Hawaiian dictionary on hand. It's called Vehevehe, W-E, yep, you got it right there, Kim. And that's actually one of the literal translations, is an ovum. So it's not quite a baby yet, but it's the precursor to a baby, so.
Okay, thank you. That was a great question. Any more questions anywhere, Kim? Nope. Okay, then thank you again, Haylin. That was awesome. And with this, we're gonna go over to Andre. Andre, hello. Can you see us? Oh, there he is. You can unmute. Yeah, Andre has been working in conservation for quite a while. Let me give you a little bit of background on him. He is now the science director of Archipelago Research and Conservation. Just started that. He spent the last decade working with endangered seabirds on Kaua'i as well as the wider Pacific. He is originally from the island of Bermuda and has worked on conservation projects around the world, and also authored numerous scientific publications and also books, including most recently the ABA Field Guide to the Birds of Hawaii. Welcome, Andre. Thank you for being here, and take it away.
Thanks, Julia. And sorry, I had to move rooms because my neighbor decided now would be a good time to mow the lawn. Right outside the window. So anyway, let's commence. So I have a quick presentation here just to talk about the birds that we work with. Let's see if I can get this shared. Okay. Can everyone see that? All right, excellent. And I'm not going to endeavor to answer the question, what came first, the shearwater or the egg? But I will talk about shearwaters laying eggs. So, you know, a lot of people, when they think about seabirds, you think about the coast. People experience seabirds on Kauai, for example, with albatross and wedge-tailed shearwaters on the coast. But a lot of our seabirds are actually found up in the mountains in the beautiful forests of the interior of Kauai. Here's a good example of the breeding grounds of some of our endangered seabirds. And the two that we spend a lot of time working with are very special seabirds to Kauai and Hawaii. They're both Hawaii endemics. This is the Newell shearwater, and Kauai is lucky enough to have 90% of the world population of this species breeding on the island. So we really are the sort of Noah's Ark for this particular species. And you can see this bird here, which is sitting in its burrow. They nest in holes in the ground, kind of like little rabbit holes. And you can see the bird sitting here with the egg just peeking out from underneath the wing. And the other species that we spend a lot of time working with is the Hawaiian petrel. This is another Hawaiian endemic, and Kauai has about 1/3 of the world's population of the species, with other populations on Lanai and Maui and Big Island. And there you can see an egg too. I had to go through quite a lot of photos to find pictures of birds with eggs, but I got one for each species, so there you go. And unfortunately, these birds, they face a lot of threats. in the Hawaiian Islands. They evolved like all of our endemic bird species without humans and without things like mammalian predators. And so when humans arrived, and as we've sort of continued to expand across the islands, we've introduced a whole range of threats that the birds aren't particularly able to cope with. So these include out away from the forest, things like the power lines. You can see those power lines on the top left. The birds fly into the colonies at night, and these power lines cross their paths, and so they hit the power lines and end up on the ground underneath. On the flip side of the breeding season, when the birds are leaving their burrows, like you see that bright light on the bottom left, the birds are attracted to lights. And so when they leave in October and November in particular, they get attracted to the lights, circle around and end up on the ground where they're vulnerable to cats and dogs and get run over by cars. And then on the top right there, we've got storms. That's a stormy scene from outside my window, not right now, but a couple of weeks ago. And with climate change, we're seeing more and more storms and turbulent weather, and this leads to flooding and landslides, like the horrible landslides we've seen on Kauai recently. And these can impact the birds as well because they're nesting up in the mountains where landslides are fairly common. And then at sea, there's seabirds. And so all the threats at sea that you can think of, things like bycatch, overfishing, the effects of climate change, all these things are having a major impact on the birds. But what we'll focus on really is the threats that face the birds up in the forest, because that's kind of the theme of today. And this is a beautiful photo that I took a couple of weeks ago in Hanakapiai, which is in Hononapali Natural Area Reserve. It's a gorgeous place. Typically here we've got mist and rain, and you're looking out across the mountains in the Ohia and Aluhe. And this is where the birds are breeding. And firstly, it's quite hard to study these species because they're rare for a start, but also they come in at night. So as darkness settles across the land and you start losing all the light, that's when the birds are coming in. So they present some particularly interesting challenges for trying to study them and understand what's going on. And we use quite a few different techniques, but some of our main ones include this here. This is a acoustic recording device or a song meter. You can see it there in the middle of the screen, again at Hanakapiai. And we have these recording at set periods during the night throughout the peak of the breeding season. And the idea here is that you don't even need to see the birds, you just get their calls. And then you can get a call rate. And over time, you can look year by year to see whether the call rates are increasing or decreasing. Because if you get more birds calling, it means there's more birds in the colony, less means less. And so therefore, what you're looking for, hopefully with management, is to get increasing numbers, increasing call rates over time, which means a healthier colony. And the other thing that we do is monitor the burrows. So there's a burrow for a annual shearwater. Not much to look at, although it's kind of picturesque there with the vegetation around it. And we have about 1,000 burrows that we're monitoring at 7 different management sites now. Between the two species, a little over 1,000. And we check these burrows throughout the breeding season. It gives us a really good way of measuring reproductive success rates. So we can get a handle on, is reproductive success rates increasing or decreasing? Are there more birds leaving the colony successfully? And also what kind of impacts are happening to these birds from predators? Because introduced predators, as I'm gonna tell you about, is one of the main threats to these birds up in the mountains. And you see that camera there to the right of the screen that's looking at the burrow. That's our sort of way of, we have cameras spread out across the colonies on various burrows. And we use the cameras, they're remote cameras, super sensitive cameras. If anything moves in front of them, you're gonna get an image. And we get from that, the data that we get from that is how the birds are doing with their fledging and so on, but also what kind of predators are there and are the predator numbers increasing or decreasing as management occurs. And here we go, this is the threats. Often people, you look up in the mountains and you think, well, there's, that they're clean and untouched mountains with and pristine condition. And unfortunately, the mountains are full of introduced predators. The top left is the worst of them all. It's the cat. You can see there that particular cat has just pulled a annual shearwater out of its burrow and is busy strangling it. And actually, I didn't include the next picture, but that one actually went and pulled out a chick as well and ate the chick after killing the adult. So there are cats across the landscape. On top right, we have the barn owl that was introduced by the Hawaii Department of Agriculture in the 60s to eat rats, but it also particularly enjoys eating seabirds. That one's actually decapitating a wedge-tailed shearwater there in that picture. Bottom left are feral pigs. Pigs will just dig anything up out of the ground, including birds and burrows, and eat them. And then rats, that's a big Norwegian rat there, but we get Norwegian rats, black rats, and Polynesian rats, and they eat the chicks and eggs of the birds. So it's a sort of never-ending suite of predators up there targeting the birds, which, as you saw from my earlier photos, are just sitting in holes in the ground where they're trying to lay their eggs and raise their chicks, but they're quite defenseless. Also introduced plant species. This was a nice native forest right here, but now you can see guava taking over. And the birds like to nest in the sort of ohia and aluhe forests. And when you get guava moving in, it becomes like a thicket of guava and the birds can't nest. And lastly, and this is something which is becoming really prevalent, unfortunately, well, it's becoming more prevalent on Kauai in recent years, is ROD, rapid ohia death. This is a disease which is killing off ohia. You can see an ohia right there in that picture, and one there which are dying from rapid ohia death. And that will have serious impacts, not only on our seabirds, but also our forest birds and indeed the watersheds. So lots of threats, but there are luckily lots of solutions too. And you know, we've been working with our partners, various partners, including the State of Hawaii, Division of Forestry and Wildlife, HALEX Ecosystem Restoration, National Tropical Botanical Gardens, various organizations to conduct management in the colonies. And you can see there's a lot of different management techniques, but a lot of them focus around predator control. So either removing predators from the landscape or with fences, keeping them out of areas where the birds are and these pristine forests are, or also habitat restoration. You can see some nice plants ready for planting up in the mountains there in the bottom right, actually at NTBG there. And the good news is management is effective. So just really quickly here, you can see on the top left, those are the numbers of birds that were predated by cats over the years. And that's the trend, down, down, down. So you remove the cats, they don't predate the birds. And on the flip side, that's reproductive success rates at all our colonies. And as the predators are being removed and the habitat is being restored, we're seeing positive reproductive success rates across the board. All of our sites now have more birds fledging, which is exactly what we want to see. And lastly, that's one of our sites. Those are the call rates on our song meters. And if you remember, I was saying those, we record the birds that are the calls of the birds, and we get call rates. And you can see there call rates increasing over time, which is exactly what we want to see, because it means there's more birds back, more birds in the air. So I thought I'd end that quick whirlwind tour with a cute bird picture, because who doesn't like cute bird pictures? That's a little mule shearwater. Also, that one's an Upper Limahuli Preserve, actually. And I think, you know, the future can be bright for these species. We know what the threats are that are facing them, and we know how to deal with them, but it does require a lot of resources and time and effort. And we need to basically spend our time out there in the mountains helping protect them if we want to see them continue to grace the skies of Kauai and the Hawaiian Islands. So that's my quick tour of the seabirds. I can talk for hours about them, but I had about 5 minutes, so.
That was awesome. And this is such a cute picture. Thank you so much, Andre. That was wonderful. That was a really great overview of what you guys are doing, and you know, you got it in those 8 minutes or however long you had. Awesome. I think it was also a good reminder. We always think about seabirds as seabirds, right? But they have to breed somewhere, so they're actually breeding in our forests, right? That's where they are. So for me, that's definitely a good reminder.
Yeah, and Julie, on that note, they're actually also helped to be the architects of our forests, right? Yeah. Because they're bringing all these marine nutrients up from the sea, right. And then they're spreading their lovely guano up in the mountains, and that gives all that phosphorus and nitrogen which the plants need. So, you know, they really are integral elements of our watersheds.
Yeah, and that's what we need, right? We need an intact forest with an intact ecosystem. You know, all the little pieces have to be there and functioning, right?
Exactly.
All right, I think I'm also going to ask you the question. You have been doing that now for so long, being in conservation and doing all this work with endangered birds. So how did you get to where you are, and what's your motivation that you have to continue to do this work?
Yeah, I've always been interested in conservation since like a little boy. You know, growing up in Bermuda, I was always in the sea, looking at all the sea life, and it sort of, I think that helped sort of spur me on to working with the natural world. I know it sounds a bit corny, but I like to make a difference with my life. And I feel like I've always been looking for projects where I can work with endangered species and try to reverse some of the catastrophic declines that we're seeing around the world. Yeah. And Kauai's been a great opportunity because I've been here for 10 years now, and it's nice to be here for such a long period of time and see that the work that not only our project, but all of the various partners and entities that are involved in this work, that the work that we're doing is actually making a difference, and we're seeing, in real time conservation action and progress. So that's, it's quite rewarding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's great that you see a positive impact with the work you're doing. That's awesome.
Shall I jump in with a couple questions?
Yes, Kim, I was about
for
to
Andre.
ask. Yes.
First, you might. I love that, furry, lovely creature. But yeah, let's bring you back up. Yeah. So we do have a question about mosquitoes and what kind of impact they might have on the 3 endangered seabirds on Kaua'i.
Yes, that's a good question. Mosquitoes obviously have a devastating impact on the forest birds. That's one of the main threats that those birds are facing, and is, a driver for extinction. With seabirds, we have done some studies to look at whether or not they've got issues like avian malaria or avian pox. And it seems that luckily it doesn't seem to be a major issue for them, which is good because they have, so many different threats that throwing in mosquitoes as well, it could be the final nail in the coffin. So far, it seems like mosquitoes are not a major issue for our endangered seabirds. And occasionally you see birds with pox, but it doesn't seem to fatally affect them. And avian malaria doesn't so far seem to be an issue from any of our studies.
What about young seabird chicks? Because I know, for example, or at least, the ones that you're working with, I know that along the coast, especially with albatross, say sometimes the young chicks, before maybe they've built up their immunities, we're all into building up our strong immunities, right, these days. I know some of the young chicks can struggle with avian pox. Do you see that in any of the seabirds in the mountains? The chicks specifically?
We don't. We're still, a lot of the birds are still above the sort of mosquito line, but there's definitely, there are definitely mosquitoes in some of the colonies because we get bitten by them. And yeah, we've never seen any issue with mosquito-borne illness yet, but it's definitely something, we should keep in mind and keep an eye on, as unfortunately the world now knows there's always emergent disease. We're in the middle of a global pandemic to remind us of that. And so there's always these sort of emergent threats which we need to keep our eyes on.
Right. And as, climate change and maybe the mosquito line moves up the mountain, Another question that's just popped in is nesting success is up thanks to trapping, but how would you assess the current threat from power lines and what is being done in this area?
Yes, the power line collision is a really serious threat to the birds. We estimate thousands of birds dying a year on power lines. But the good news is that the areas where power line collisions are occurring are really clustered in key areas. So we know where those areas are. And that means that we can work with KUC, for example, to figure out ways in which to reduce those power line collisions. And I don't know if you've seen on Kauai, all those diverters that are going up at a great pace at the moment across the island. That's one of the methods in which we're sort of working with the utility company to figure out ways to reduce power line collisions. Also things like LEDs, which are lit diverters for the nighttime, we're sort of testing those, and lowering power lines or removing power lines in certain areas. So it is a serious threat to the birds. I'd say it's one of the biggest threats to their existence, but we know where the problems are and we know how to solve them now. And I think particularly in the last year, there's been a lot of movement towards dealing with that issue.
For those who may not be familiar with the term diverter that you were referring to, would you describe and explain where somebody might see those on the island?
Yeah, sure. They're you'll see them hanging on the lines. They're spaced out along the lines, and they're about that big. They're sort of hanging from the lines, and the idea is they just increase the visibility of the line. If you think about these birds, they're flying along beyond dusk, so in the darkness. And at the last minute, if they're not used to having lines across the airspace. That's not something they evolved with. So they just careen straight into them if they're crossing their path. The idea with the diverter is to increase the visibility of them so that the bird sees them before it collides with them and diverts around them. And you can see them, there's a lot of them now through the coffee fields, Hanapepe, up near Kilauea. So there are definitely more and more of those going on the power lines, which is great to see.
And is it fair to say where we might see them hanging on the power lines is an indication of the flyways and the pathways of the birds coming in?
Yeah, there's a lot of flyways for the birds. They particularly like to sort of move up through valleys, for example, valley mouths, and anywhere where a power line is highly exposed is an area where you could have an issue. If the power line is hidden by trees, for example, then the birds aren't going to collide with them. But if these areas where they're high above the vegetation on a flyway, then those are particularly bad.
Just quickly looking over at one of our Facebook pages, we have a mahalo coming in from Diane. Thanks for the presentation. And we have one more follow-up question on the mosquitoes, and then we're going to move along to Dustin. But the question on mosquitoes is, would they be susceptible, they meaning the seabirds, to West Nile virus or other diseases?
Like I said, we haven't seen any indication of any mosquito-borne disease, and it's something that we need to keep our eyes on. I'm not sure. I mean, it's just something to keep an eye on, and so far, no indication of that being an issue. You know, the big issue, for example, is feral cats. I mean, you know, talk about mosquitoes, there's feral cats all over the landscape, from the lowlands all the way up to the highest mountain peaks, and they are causing a devastating impact on our native wildlife. You know, cats should not be roaming around outside. They need to be inside people's homes, where they belong, where they're safe as well. So it's introduced mammalian predators and avian predators, which are still the ones that we're really focused on up in the mountains, and trying to keep the cats indoors, keep them away from being outside, because they cause such a devastating impact on our native wildlife.
Great, that's all I've got, Julia.
Okay, sounds good. Those were great questions. Thank you, Kim. And thank you again, Andre. Now we're going to move over to Dustin Wolkis. Hi, Dustin. Thank you for being here. And I also have a little short introduction for him. As seed bank and laboratory manager at the National Tropical Botanical Garden, Dustin Wolkis serves as the curator of the conservation seed collection and is the principal investigator for seed conservation research. He is broadly interested in seed conservation ecology and physiology, and has authored several papers on the subject. He also serves as deputy chair of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature Seed Conservation Specialist Group, and is affiliate faculty in the School of Life Sciences at the University of Hawaii. Welcome, thank you for being here, Dustin, and we are looking forward to hearing more about seeds now.
Hey, thanks for having me. And thanks, Andre, that was great. I learned things. Okay, can everyone see? Yes? Great. Okay, so in this brief little introduction, I'll be talking about hua, but also kupu, which is germination. So I'll give you a brief introduction. About 1 million species worldwide are threatened by extinction. But here on Hawaii, about 90% of our 1360 native plant species are endemic. They're found nowhere else on Earth. And over 50% of those are species of conservation concern. Some of the challenges to our flora include climate changes, destruction of habitats, loss of specialized pollinators, invasive weeds, induced animals, and pathogens, including rod. And this slide summarizes native plant species in the archipelago. So you can see Kaua'i has the largest number of species endemic to the state, but also the largest number of single island endemics. So these are species just endemic to one island. Kaua'i also has the largest number of PEP species. PEP species are plants with fewer than 50 individuals remaining in the wild. And so we have 35% of the PEP species here on Kauai. And so that brings us to the mission of the National Tropical Botanical Garden, which is to enrich life through discovery, scientific research, conservation, and education by perpetuating the survival of plants, ecosystems, and cultural knowledge of tropical regions. One of the strategies that you can use to accomplish this kind of a mission is to have an offsite or an ex situ conservation collection of plants. And it turns out that if you're going to have that kind of a collection, that it's most efficient to house that collection as seeds in a seed bank. And when I say most efficient, you can name your metric, whether it's time, dollars, human resources, water, electricity, storage space. It's most efficient to have that collection as seeds in a seed bank. And so that's what I'll be talking about today. So you've probably heard of seed banks in the past. The most famous is probably the Svalbard Global Seed Vault in Spitsbergen, Norway, in the Arctic Circle. It continues to make headlines. Or maybe you've heard of the Kew Millennium Seed Bank in the UK. And in the US, the National Laboratory for Genetic Resource Preservation is the National Seed Bank. But there are actually many seed banks in Hawaii, and I'll be talking about the NTBG Seed Bank and Laboratory, which is housed here in Kalaheo in the Juliet Rice Wickman Botanical Research Center. This is a view of the really newly organized seed lab space from either end here, and that reorganization is in thanks to Kelly Jones, pictured here. And so in my role, I'm the curator for the conservation collection of seeds and also the PI for seed conservation research. And so on the collections and conservation side, we have just over 16 million seeds, just over 4,600 accessions, and the overwhelming majority of those are Hawaiian endemic species. And 40% of the collection are Endangered Species Act listed threatened and endangered species. But we don't just house seeds, we also conserve fern spores and pollen as well. So switching over to the research side, we use germination to answer many of the questions that we ask. So for example, this is a typical seed survival curve. So seed starts out with high viability and then declines fairly rapidly after some threshold. So it's our job to figure out what that curve might look like, both at the species and the accession or seed lot level, but then also our job to do something like this, try to push that threshold out a little bit and maybe try to make the slope not quite as steep. And we've done a little bit of this work in Hawaii. So this idea of a regeneration interval. And at the time of the most recent test, when we did this, 195 species were above their regeneration or the recollection interval. That's the time you take seeds out of storage and you propagate them, and then you go back out to that plant or that population and recollect if they still exist, or harvest the yield from those plants to replenish the seed bank collection. And only 45 species had a recollection interval of less than 5 years. And so this is with 30 years worth of data in Hawaii. And so it's kind of an indicator that seed banking is working. Another thing that I'm interested in is how seeds behave when you try to apply our limited seed conservation toolkit to them. And so there's this storage category called intermediate freeze sensitive, which is really kind of interesting and peculiar. And we've done some of that in Hawaii. So here, if you're below the 0 line, you are likely intermediate freeze sensitive. And if you're above the 0 line, then you are orthodox or able to be conserved by conventional storage methods. And so in Hawaii, this Campanulaceae family, which is the largest family in our flora, looks like that it's probably intermediate freeze sensitive, with except for maybe this Trematolobelia on the end. Other families include Cyperaceae, Rubiaceae, and Urticaceae. So that's sedges and the coffee family and Mamaki, or the nettle family. And so this is really interesting. And so Hawaii has the highest proportion of any flora ever assessed, exhibiting this really peculiar seed storage behavior category. And so Hawaii can really serve as a model for other island, tropical, and subtropical ecosystems. One of my other interests is dormancy and germination ecology. And we've done a little bit of work with that in Hawaii. We've done some of that with both subspecies of Hibiscus waimei. Here, do I have a mouse here? And Dianella sandwichensis on the bottom right. 6 species of lobeliads, that's Hawaiian Campanulaceae, and 21 21 montane Hawaiian species. We're also interested in some seed physiology and ecology of ohia. I couldn't do something with Kim and not mention ohia. yeah, happy to speak about any of these further, but I think I'm out of time, so I'll say thank you and take any questions.
Right. Thank you, Dustin. That was great. Thank you very much for all this information. Very interesting to learn about all the species. I didn't know that we had so many of the endangered species here on Kauai. That's really, yeah, kind of sad, but also good to know that people are working on it.
Yeah, we're really a special island in a special archipelago.
Yeah, definitely. So also for you, the question, how do you got to where you are? What's the most fascinating aspect maybe of your work, even though I think that's all of it from what I just learned?
Yeah, so when I was a kid, I always liked being outdoors, and I loved camping and I loved hiking, but I didn't know that jobs like this existed. I don't think we had science fairs or I don't remember career days or anything like that at my school, my elementary or high schools. And so after high school, I just kind of took some college classes at a community college because that's what you're supposed to do after high school. And I ended up finishing my undergrad in 11 years. It took me 11 years to do that because I didn't have a real direction. But at the end, I kind of got serious. I got really interested in herbal medicine. I'd always been interested in plants, but I got interested in herbal medicine. And so I thought I would just transfer to university and knock out a degree in biology so I could get the prereqs to go to like naturopathic school. But then I took my first ecology class and I never looked back. I'm like, oh wait, I can study plants like on their own terms, like outside. Like I don't like really love people all that much anyway. So better to be with the plants on their own terms. Yeah. So yeah, I finished that, and then I started working at the Desert Botanical Garden in the research there, and that's where I got spoiled doing research at a botanical institution. And so I went back and I got a master's degree in plant biology and conservation from Arizona State University. And then it was during that time, I was still working at the garden doing one thing and then working at doing my grad research. So totally flipping the switch from one day to the next, working on completely different things. And I saw this job come through and it looked too good to be true. You know, Hawaii is a botanist stream. However, unfortunately, it's also known as the extinction capital of the world. Not just plants, but birds and insects and other taxa as well. And so for someone conservation minded, it really seemed like a dream job. And so I defended my thesis and came here to take the job 4 days, left 4 days after defending my thesis. Yeah, and I should also say now I'm actually a PhD student at the University of Copenhagen in the Natural History Museum.
Awesome, that's great. Yeah,
that's fantastic.
I'm glad you found this job.
Yeah, and congratulations. I didn't realize.
It's a dream job. I love this job.
Yay. So a question, well, first of all, some sentiments in agreement of your statement about, you know, not liking people all that much. So got some agreement on that. But I
like you all. You all are awesome.
Right.
That's one of the great things about my job is I get to collaborate with people like all of you.
So we do have a question though. Does Dustin work/study anywhere else in the Pacific? I would say you or have you maybe?
No, I don't really. I stick to this island even mostly too. So I look at seeds from across the archipelago, and you know I've done some little bit of field work on other islands like Lehua, but I'm pretty much staying put here. However, in our collection, we have seeds from all across the Pacific. So field botanists and scientists at NTBG have been working across the Pacific for 30 years and more, and they brought seeds back along the way. So we have an interesting collection of Pacific island seeds in our collection as well.
Have you had the opportunity to visit Svalbard and the seed banking project there?
Yeah, that's a good question. No, I haven't. So one of the things that makes our seed bank a little bit different from theirs is that we're actively curating the collection in the way that we're testing for longevity in real time over the lifespan of a seed accession or a seed lot, and we focus on native species. So at Svalbard, their focus is on crop species, and they black box them, which means that they take the seeds in and they put them away, and then that's kind of it. So we know that it works because Syria unfortunately had to make a withdrawal recently, and the seeds were viable and they were able to grow some and then replenish their collection with some of the yield. And so we know that black boxing does work. Yes. They do have a Legumes of the World program though. And so that could be my way to try to get there one day.
There you go. So I have to ask about ohia, because, that's what I do. Will you share, because, I do a lot of hikes. Well, pre-COVID I did, and hopefully maybe this fall I'll be back up and running again, just when our ohia trees have gone through their whole life cycle and they're hopefully profuse with ohia seeds. Can you share with people a little bit about best way to store seed if they're collecting seed from a tree in their backyard? Because my understanding is the quote shelf life may not be as long as some people think.
Yeah, so ohia is actually really interesting in that way. So at ambient temperature and relative humidity, ohia seeds will lose viability in a matter of months. So we've seen that. Don Drake, who's now a professor at UH, did some work on that back in the 90s. And he noticed that was happening, as did some others. And we did a project where we harvested ohia seeds from herbarium specimens in a chronosequence going back, I think 30 or more years. And not one seed from any specimen germinated at those conditions. So we've seen that. However, seeds are reported as orthodox, and we can confirm that. That's able to be conserved by conventional storage methods, which is basically dry and cold. So dried and then frozen, sub-freezing temperatures. And we have not seen a decrease in viability for any of our ohia accessions here. And that our oldest seed accessions go back, I think maybe 12, 13 years or something, and we haven't seen a loss in viability. So if you can dry them and then freeze them, then they're likely to last decades.
That's good. But if you don't have that capability or the green thumb, so to speak, then the rule of thumb would be collect the seeds and sow them as soon as possible. Is that correct?
Yeah.
For ohia. And one of the things we also do with ohia, we help collect seed as part of a statewide seed banking initiative. And I know that we've dropped some seeds off there at NTBG for seed banking, but there are other seed banking facilities on the island too, correct? Will you share some of those?
Yeah, so there's actually many seed banks throughout Hawaii, I think I mentioned, and we're all part of the Hawaii Seed Bank Partnership. And so there's many. There's the other one on Kauai is DOFA actually has one. And they have a great facility there. They focus on kind of like post-disturbance workhorse species that can be used in restoration, including ohia. And it's, I think, a great way to have seed banking, even on this just one island, is having these two seed banks. Yeah, they have a great facility there. And we all reciprocate with each other whenever we can, but especially with ohia collections. So we're all trying to, we're trying to do kind of a three-way reciprocation. So we'll collect ohia, and the good thing about ohia is, one, it's orthodox, so it can be stored by conventional storage methods, and you can fit many seeds into a small area, right? Think about trying to conserve as many ohia seeds as you would willy-willy seeds. right? It's a totally different sort of thing. So then we always reciprocate on island with the Dofa seed bank, and then maybe off island with Lion Arboretum. And then we're all kind of reciprocating with each other.
Great, thank you. I do have one question that's come in from Dan. What insect and bird pollinators are unique to some of the plants here on Kauai?
I think that's an excellent question. And I think it's a question that we haven't really fully explored. And in a lot of cases, I don't think we know. Yeah, in a lot of cases, I don't think we know who the pollinator is. In a lot of cases, I don't think we know who the disperser is. And in some cases, they may have been lost on both sides, pollinator and disperser.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, I think that's my questions that I have found in the chat and Q&A, and I'm taking one quick last sweep on Facebook. So you are good to go, Julia.
All right. Okay. So there's one last question that I would like to ask our panelists. So you may have noticed that we lost one. Haylin had to take care of some family business, and she says thank you to everybody and thanks for coming. But unfortunately, she had to leave a little bit early. But we still have Dustin and Andre, and so I'm going to ask him both of them our round robin question, which is, how do we protect our forests for our children's future? I don't know who would like to go first.
I have one way.
Okay.
A big way is that you can vote.
Yep. That's definitely a great way. Mm-hmm. Yep.
You know, I think also just being educated into what the threats to the forests are, understanding that the forests are really important aspects of our lives, that, you know, we can't exist without them, and playing your part in protecting them. So particularly something like rapid ohia death, like understanding how that can be spread, making sure that you don't inadvertently spread that horrendous disease into areas which don't currently have it on Kauai. Looking on the internet, and I'm sure Kim can share various links on where you should go to find out more information about that disease, because we don't want to see Kauai going the way that Big Island has with the spread of rapid ohia death.
Yeah.
Great answers. Thank you. And yeah. I added our Mentimeter link.
Yep, perfect. So everybody who's viewing right now, please go to menti.com and enter the code that's in the chat. And there you can also answer the question, how do we protect the forest for our children's future? And I hope that Kim can put it up on the screen so that we can all see what the answers are going to be.
And while I do that, Julia, there is a question that came through, a really cool question on our Q&A. Do you have the ability to pop up Q&A and you guys can talk that while I do the other thing? How's that?
Let's see, where do I find that?
The bottom where you've got.
Yeah, I got it.
Got it. Okay. I will start sharing.
Okay, so the question is, would there be a benefit to monitoring a small group of several plants in the long term with cameras and field observations? Maybe you're already doing this.
Yeah, this has been done on Oahu, but I don't think it's been done on this island. And yeah, there is a benefit. Some of these plants, they're down to just a few individuals, in some cases two. In some cases, they've already probably gone extinct. But in some cases, we know where those last two or those last few plants are. And so in a lot of cases, they're difficult to access. So one of the ways we could monitor them is with a camera, but instead of storing the photos locally, store them on a server. So get it cell service and access the photos from your computer by logging into the server. And then what that will allow you to do is monitor the phenology of the plant. And that can help you plan field work, especially if you want to collect seeds. There's nothing worse than wasting helicopter money going to this, the last few plants and then not having seeds or not having them ready. Yeah. Or it's your only chance to get there and the seeds are immature, and so you collect them anyway, right? Because it's better than not having any seeds.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's always the thing that people that, you know, that we don't think about the fact how difficult it actually is to do research here in the mountains, how much logistics and effort and money it takes to get people there, to get there and then not find what you want to find, or the weather is bad, or, you know, if you forget to bring your equipment or whatever. So I think that's a good reminder on how hard it is actually to do research in the forest here. All right, I see that Kim got the screen up for the Mentimeter. So please, if you're here, please go to menti.com and enter the code that's on the screen right now, 59460380, and then answer the question, how do we protect our forest for our children's future? I see the first answers coming in.
While people do that, I've got more questions coming in as well in the chat. So we have Nina responded, another option is to study flower volatiles that give a good hint of types of pollinators and specificity in addition to shape and color. Can you expand on that a little bit, Dustin? It says, oh, she added, we have a project where we study pollen on museum insect collections with Bishop Museum. OMG, that is so cool. I don't know if you have more details to share. That might be a whole different Kuleana, Dustin. But what I'm interpreting that to mean is that, you know, I love museum collections, right? There are hundreds-year-old museum collections of flora and fauna at Bishop Museum, and then science moves along, and all of a sudden we have this great new scientific technique, and we can go to those, you know, 100-year-old collections and pull them out and do some sort of science and discover new information. And it sounds like that is one of the things that NTBG is doing to try to identify the lost pollinator of Brachynia. That is so cool. That's like a mic drop, if you ask me. We also got a couple other comments. Excellent, loving the talks and management of the show. And as you can see, the responses to our Mentimeter question continue to come in. So in answer to how do we protect our forests for our children's future, we have education, cats indoors, combat climate change, study pollinator seeds, more signage for visitors, educate, sterilization stations, don't spread invasives, love the forest, remove feral cats, conservation, vote, and I'm gonna end on care.
Yeah, that's a good end. And I'm gonna take this opportunity to share another good news with you, because we are gonna do this again. Next Forest Friday. The next Forest Friday is on May 7th. And we will announce the time, and please watch out for an email or check on our social media. We will announce at what time and who the panelists are going to be. But I can already share the new topic, which is how do you connect with the forest? And so for May, we have chosen this topic because we want to honor May Day a little bit and talk about all the cultural practices in the forest, and then maybe also talk about some positive impacts that everybody can do when you go in the forest. And we are really looking forward to it. And I hope that you are too, and you will be able to join us. And also another reminder, lastly, we are recording all these events. They are on our YouTube channel and on our Facebook sites. And so if you missed the first one, last month's one, you can go there and watch it. Or if you want to rewatch this one, you can do that. And also the next one will also be there on our YouTube channel. And with that, I would like to thank everybody for being here. Thank you, Andre. Thank you, Dustin. Thank you, Haylin. Great job. Thank you, Kim. And I hope to see you all next month.
And thank you, Julia. Great job hosting. Mwah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers, guys. Bye.
Aloha.